when are we doing that? All right, good morning, everybody. I'd like to welcome you to this meeting of the County Santa Barbara Board of Supervisors budget hearing. And can I get a roll call?
Mr. Williams? Here. Mr. Hart? Here. Ms. Hartman?
Here.
Mr. Adam? Here. Mr. Lavanino?
Here. Please join me, rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. Ready? Begin. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right. I am going to go a little bit out of order this morning so that we can get public comment taken care of. So this is for items that are not on today's agenda. Madam Clerk.
Chair Lavanino and members of the board, we have one request to speak on general public comment today, and that's Ed Kolaski. Ed?
Let me put that up. Okay. Although it's not official, the board may have decided that our second story is not located solely over the garage. At least there was no mention of it in the last meeting. As you can clearly see here, the second story is located over the garage, the kitchen, the dining room, laundry room, and part of the living room. Now they want me to do setbacks, and back in 2014, they voted 7-0 that we did not need to do setbacks. This was after my architect gave a great speech. So why didn't they put this drawing, or at least the one with the architectural view there, in their 64-page report? It was clearly not located solely over the garage. For the last 5 years, I have lived with the fact that it's solely over the garage and nobody can explain what the heck they're talking about. And you talk to an architect who doesn't know what's going on, they say they have to hold themselves back from laughing at it. So at any rate, the irony of the whole situation is you can't really see it in this drawing, but in the second floor, John Verdiak decided to request that we push the second floor forward 1.5 feet. And we did that. And that was done early. But now he's turned around, not only doesn't claim that he didn't do it, but plus he is stating that he wants an 8-foot setback, which is ridiculous. At least the 3 of the other members only suggested a 2-foot setback. You switch the other drawing. These are the houses that were in contention. The one in the upper right, that is a house across the street from me and 2 doors down. According to the Board of Architectural Review, there are no second stories on our street. That's 2 doors down. The house on the left is just plain ugly, the blue one there. It's like, well, Ryan said that, Cooksey, who is a staff member, said ugly or is not a contention for refusal. And then these other 2 down here, the one on the left has all these push-outs, so we didn't want to do anything like that because there was known fact that Cecilia Brown and others did not like that house because it's the only house probably in the whole Santa Barbara County that's like that. It was built the same time that I was applying to do our construction. The one on the right is really boxy. I should have had a better view of it, but it looks very boxy. But it was going up at the same time we were applying for our review. And I'm looking at those 2, I said, well, we can easily do a better job than those 2. It was without question. Yet we got rejected because, as they said, we were located solely over the garage when we weren't located solely over the garage. So in trying to figure out what the heck is going on, it just seemed to me that they wanted some money under the table, and I presume that's why we got rejected. We did not make a little donation. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any more public comments?
Chair Levanino, members of the board, that was our only request to speak.
Okay, very good. Well, I will kick it over to our CEO, Mona Miyasato, for the budget overview.
Good morning, Chair Lavanino and board members. Thank you, everyone, for being here this morning. We are beginning today. This is our hearing to adopt our fiscal year 2019-20 budget. And before I begin, I do want to say thank you to all the department heads, their staff, and particularly all their fiscal officers, assistant directors, deputy directors who've helped work throughout the year to put the budget together and who do an outstanding job for the residents of our county. And also, I would like to thank our Auditor Controller's Office. Behind me is Auditor Controller Betsy Schaefer, her Assistant Auditor Controller Ed Price, and their staff led by Kyle Slattery and Robert Geis. And I also want to thank my budget and research team, Paul Clementi, Richard Morgantini, AJ Kinoveva, Rachel Lippman, Wes Welch, Stephen Yee, all of whom are led by our budget director and assistant CEO, Jeff Frapwell. So, today we're going to have a quick overview by myself, giving some context. Jeff Frapwell, our budget director, will provide a summary of what's in the recommended budget. If the board would like any updates from any of the departments, we are going to go by functional group, and you can ask any department to come up and for more information to respond to questions, and departments also have an opportunity to provide more information if they would like to. Then the board will deliberate and make some funding decisions and then hopefully adopt the budget with the recommended actions. So, just a little bit of context setting. When we talk about the budget, we often discuss one project versus another. Departments talk about their strategies for the year. One department's desires over the other desires of all the needs in the county, a few community members' requests. And this is appropriate because this is the time. These are when we make funding decisions. But it's also a reminder that our budget is our operational plan for the entire year, for the entire county, representing decisions we've made regarding our finite resources of money and staff time within the context of even our many state and federal mandates and requirements. It also reflects the years of commitment that your board and previous boards have made to focus on the big picture and make choices about our future. So our cover this year is showing a variety of different projects that the board has committed to in the past and in the future, will be committing in the future similar projects, just to be a reminder to all of us about the many things the county does. The first is the Northern Branch Jail. As you know, it's been a discussion for decades, and the board has been planning for this for many years. This has consumed the time of the Sheriff's Office and our General Services Department for several years, and as you know, it's scheduled to be completed this fiscal year. Goleta Beach Park's replacement bridge was actually completed by Public Works last year with an improved bike path and walkway. And again, just one project that demonstrates the board's commitment to improved access and safety to our beaches and our parks. The Koyama Solar Array is a 327-acre private project that was approved by the board in 2014. It generates 40 megawatts of electricity, enough to power 16,000 homes, and it again conveys the commitment to looking at other energy sources, and also that the utility grade ordinance is in planning's long-range work plan. Santa Maria Levee was again approved by the board in 2014. It was a project completed by Public Works. And because of that levee improvement, it protects 20,000 parcels and 17,000 structures from risk of flooding. The city of Santa Maria operates a multi-use path and a trail on a portion of that, and again represents our partnerships with cities and work to have additional recreational opportunities, but also to protect agriculture and our residents. And the last photo is from First Five. Again, in the end, all that we're doing is a commitment to improve the lives of our families and children in the county of Santa Barbara to ensure their health and safety. So here's our budget timeline. We've been starting this process like we do every year back in November with our fiscal issues and forecast through budget development guidelines that we go to the board in December. We did our April workshops for a week. In May, we released the recommended budget, and here we are today with the budget adoption hearings. The recommended budget, as we've talked about at the workshops, have no service level reductions proposed, the first time in many years, and revenue growth that allows some moderate and modest expansions. Our total operating budget is $1.14 billion, and same with our expenditures and net increase to reserves. We've been talking about this year as a milestone year, and indeed it is. Again, no service level reductions were required. This is the first time since 2009, I believe. Again, it reflects your board and prior board's prioritization and commitment to certain key projects and programs. We're continuing to improve how we do business with Renew 22. And again, ensuring fiscal practices are responsible as good stewards of the public dollar and looking to ensure that we have a buffer for a potential recession and addressing long-standing fiscal issues. And we've talked about this quite a bit in our April workshops, but again, the Northern Branch Jail is coming to fruition. The fire tax shift will reach its target in the 1920 fiscal year. The Tahigos Resource Recovery Project, which had its, not groundbreaking, what was it called? Yes, groundbreaking. Not a ribbon cutting, groundbreaking, thank you, was just held a couple of weeks ago, and as many of you know, that's been just started under construction, but it's been underway for several years. And then we said, because of the board's pension cost-sharing plans and negotiations with our unions, this is the first year we have a slight reduction in our pension cost compared to last year. We also have major capital projects that are continuing, and we are looking at a combination of debt financing and one-time revenues of the general fund to support those. Maintenance funding is continued to be supported by the 18% formula. That plus money for some deferred maintenance projects that are capital projects means that we are going to be exceeding the target identified in 2014. And again, cannabis enforcement funding has allowed us to staff additional positions primarily for enforcement. And I'm just showing these briefly because we talk about the operating budget. The departments, when they came up in April, did talk about their capital projects and their capital investment. But I just wanted to remind everyone, the county is doing quite a bit. We have IT improvements across the county in different departments, and you see some of those. And this is general fund and non-general fund. We continue to work on Lower Mission Creek flooding and Laguna San upgrade. This year, you saw in Fire's budget money for capital projects for 2 projects, Halama Beach affordable accommodations, improvements to the Royal Borough Ranger Station, and the general fund projects that we've been talking about as first on the list for COPs, although we have now are able to fund it through cash. And those are long-standing projects we haven't been able to get to in quite a while. Key challenges remain. We have a tight labor market, which impedes our recruitment ability and retention. We are always facing mandates and regulations from the state and federal government, although we've seen a better state budget this year, and some of the potential takeaways didn't come to fruition in the public health department. We're continuing to try to keep up with technology improvements and infrastructure so that we can do more innovative things. We're continuing to work on the criminal justice system and diverting mentally ill and putting them in areas that are more appropriate for their needs, and addressing homelessness with a consolidated work plan from our safety net departments. As I said, we're always keeping an eye to the future as well and looking for ways to protect us and buffer us in case there is another recession. Economists say there will be one, it's just not known when it will be. And these are some of the ways we are ensuring that we are continue fiscally responsible practices, and that is one-time funds for one-time uses, for cannabis revenue, because we're still not sure what the market will do. It's using it primarily for enforcement, and after that, one-time uses. We're fully funding the strategic reserve, and again, making investments that have ongoing returns, continuing efficiencies, looking for opportunities and applying for grants, and partnering with other agencies. Renew 22 will be in its third year next year, and again, the primary objective of Renew 22 is to make us a more resilient organization should there be an economic downturn or a natural emergency, and that means just not our finances, but our processes, our systems, our staffing to retain the best and the brightest, and responsiveness to our customers. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Jeff Rapwell.
Good morning, Mr. Chair and board members. As we walk through the fiscal part of the presentation this morning, I want to just highlight a few things for you. Through the balance of the budget hearings, we'll go over these 6 kind of bullet points. I want to talk really about budget hearing materials that are in front of you and available on the county's website as well. Talk about the recommended budget summary, some expansion requests that have been funded, both pre-workshops, since workshop, and then the ones that are remaining for your board's consideration today. We'll talk about functional group summaries and department presentations. Again, this would be a time for your board to have departments make presentations to you or answer questions should you have any. We'll move into board deliberations and finally recommended actions today. In looking at the budget materials, in the binders that you have in front of you, these are the tabs, so tab 1 through 32, and it includes all the board letter and hearing schedules, the budget inquiry forms that your board has provided our office and we provided responses to. The adjustment requests that are adopted as part of the budget, A1 and A2. Any restoration and expansion requests that are deferred to today's hearings, as well as the other items that you see here on the chart. As our CEO mentioned, our budget for the upcoming year is recommended at $1.141 billion, billion dollars. And it is balanced, as we are required to, and without service reductions. We have staffing increases of about 78 positions. You can see they're going from 4,170 to 4,248. That represents about a 1.9% increase in total FTEs, and the majority of those are within sheriff, as it relates to the opening of the Northern Branch Jail. That's 23 of those 78 positions. This detail for all those, both FTE and the budget, is in section C's, pages 20 through 22. As we look at the operating revenues by fund, you can see here that the general fund makes up 39%, social services 14, behavioral wellness 11, are our three greatest funds. And you look specifically with the general fund, the amount of discretionary versus other revenues. Discretionary, as the name implies, are really those revenues which your board has the greatest discretion or how to allocate those and spend those. We'll talk about that in the next slide, is how that breaks down. Here you'll see the primary sources of your board's discretionary dollars. You can see within property taxes that totals about $227.9 million, and that's truly discretion does not have strings attached of how you allocate those. But interestingly, a lot of that is actually required that you use as match to bring down the federal and state dollars. So even though it's discretionary, quote unquote, there really are some pulls on that limit total flexibility. You'll see the cost allocation services, 11.1 million, local sales taxes, about 11 million, TOT is going up to 13.2 million, our cannabis tax revenues, which we'll talk about momentarily, 5.6 million, and all other revenues, 7.2, for a total discretionary revenues of $276 million. That's about an $8.5 million growth from the prior fiscal year, and about 3.2% overall growth in your board's discretion. As we look at the operating expenses by fund, you can see here again, general fund being 35%, social services 15%, and behavioral wellness round out the top three at 12%. Our staffing trend, you can see here over time. The increase is again going from 4,170 in the current fiscal year to projected 4,248 next year. Again, large 1.9% increase, largely driven by sheriff, 23 positions, behavioral wellness 16, and fire 9, and then several other departments have minor increases. Looking at the county's portion of retirement contribution, as we mentioned both during workshops and a moment ago this morning, our contribution is largely flat. And this is the county's portion, and the reason it's flat is really a reflection of a couple items. We haven't had changes in the assumption rates by SB SERS. We've had, importantly, we are implementing MOU changes with our employees to change the cost share of retirement costs between the employer and employee. And so it's been able to stabilize our retirement contribution. Let's talk about cannabis tax revenues. You can see here, as we move into fiscal year 1920 and move into our second year of revenue from this category. And here's the allocation that your board approved in 1819. You can see that in the left column of numbers, allocated about, in the enforcement, about $1,690,000 between those departments listed here on the screen. We're estimated to spend about $2,089,000 on enforcement, and recommended next year $2.8 million toward enforcement. You can see how that breaks down between departments. Some departments are relatively flat in this area of enforcement, and you can see there is also a significant increase in commitment on enforcement to the Sheriff's Department, included in the recommended budget. Rounding out the balance of the use of cannabis tax revenue, you'll see here in the tax collection and program administration costs. If you look at the first line, the county executive office, this $200,000 that was spent or estimated spent in the current year is really related to the implementation of a new software for cannabis tracking and licensing, and that was a one-time cost. Plus, we have security costs associated with enhanced security here in the facility related to tax receipt times. You'll see in the fiscal year 1920 that number goes down, really to cover basically security and just the ongoing licensing fee for that software. You'll see that the recommended budget includes an increased allocation to the Treasurer Tax Collector's Office, about $165,000 to cover staffing costs, and some support costs from the CEO's office on staff in this effort. Looking at then the other budgeted one-time uses of the cannabis tax revenue, you can see the board adopted in 1819 in the current fiscal year, movement of funds to maintenance for public works, general services, and parks, increased strategic reserve, plan development, long-range plan projects, HCD clean energy roadmap, as well as one-time dollars to the libraries to support the efforts that CSD is doing with library funding. And in the recommended budget, you'll see that we're moving the $405,000 unspent in long-range planning forward into fiscal year 1920 and augmenting that to reflect updated cost estimates from the department to accomplish those projects. In addition, the recommended budget includes the allocation of about $1.3 million from cannabis money to support the replacement of the in-car video replacement for the sheriff. Finally, you can see down there in the very bottom as a summary, estimated revenues in the current fiscal year, $5,450,000. We think we had projected there was going to be a $517,000 carryover. In reality, if you look at the middle column of numbers, we think there's a $323,000 carryover from current year into next year. And that you can see rolling forward in the far right column. And so as you get down to the very bottom line, there's about $889,600 available for your board to allocate today, should you so desire. As we look at the area of maintenance funding, this is largely driven by your board's 18% policy, but it does this. Excuse me. This slide also reflects both the ongoing baseline funding, which we have for those departments, about $2.3 million. The second line there being 18% formula monies that are allocated to your board by your board. And finally, some one-time monies, as our CEO mentioned, for projects that we're paying on a cash basis that had otherwise been considered to be debt financed. So that brings our maintenance funding to about $16 million. And you can see there, as it breaks down, other funding that is available to address the county's deferred maintenance, specifically SB1 dollars, as some of the grant dollars that are received by Public Works. So as you look across, we're pleased to say that the recommended budget includes about $23.2 million to fund deferred maintenance projects in the county. I guess I should say that's a deferred maintenance as well as regular maintenance. So some of the baseline funding does not address deferred, it addresses ongoing maintenance. As we look again at your board's discretion and the allocation of key discretionary fund balances, I want to walk through this slide a little bit for you. There's a lot of numbers on it. I won't go through all of them, obviously. But as you can see, that the board or the recommended budget sets funds aside for specific purposes and to meet both your board's priorities and previous policies, but as well as position the county for uncertainties. Behavioral wellness, $4.8 million is the projected fund balance. Again, this is there to address unexpected and higher need for IMD beds, other specialty needs within behavioral wellness, and or to address audit findings or other funding return of other federal and state funding should that become necessary. The cannabis tax revenue I talked about a moment ago, that's the $889,000 that is available for your board's reallocation today. The technology replacement fund we discussed during the workshop. This is really, I expect to spend that this year, but won't do so until we have proposals from the departments vetted by the EITC, the Executive IT Council, and then brought to your board for consideration mid-year. Our strategic reserve is fully funded at your board's policy of 8%, $36.3 million, $36.4 million roughly. Litigation reserve, in consultation with counsel, we believe this is appropriate, $6.5 million there. Disaster recovery, roughly $3 million available. Program stabilization, $171,800. Again, this is money that we're going to identify later in the presentation is available for your board's reallocation. Finally, we do maintain $500,000 in facility maintenance for emergency repairs should those become necessary for general services or CSD. Assessment appeals, this is there to address significant cases should that become necessary either for outside counsel or increased staff time associated with supporting those assessment appeals. Finally, new jail operations. It has gone to $12.9 million. This is again consistent with your board's funding policy and plan that your board adopted. Emergency issue 24/7. This is available 24,700. Is available for your boards at reallocation today. And finally, contingencies at just over $4 million. So that brings projected fund balance of about $71.8 million. To put this in context, I think it's important to, it looks like a big number, but to put this in context, if you look at the Government Finance Office Association's recommendation on available fund balances within a county or government's general fund, they recommend an amount roughly equal to 2 months of operating expense. For us, that number would be about $67 million. Now, before we get too excited that 67 is less than the 71 showing here, from this 71, you'll have to back out the $12.9 million. That is already identified for a use of that. And so if you back out that, there's about $58 million in kind of discretionary fund balances. So if you compare the 58 that we are projecting here in the recommended budget, we subtract the million that we're going to discuss later in the presentation, you really get down to $57.8 million, and that compares with the 67 that the GFOA would recommend that we have. So we're about $9 million shy of what GFOA recommends that we maintain, but we do think that it is prudent, and we can continue to work on that should your board desire. As we think forward, I know we're in fiscal year 1920, as we look forward to the following fiscal year, should your board desire, and we may recommend during the development guidelines for the following fiscal year, perhaps addressing the strategic reserve to 10% instead of the 8%. So as we look at budget expansions, we certainly have needs that have been expressed by departments, and we've addressed many of those. We addressed some of those in 3 tranches. First tranche was those expansion requests that we handled pre-budget workshops, and we've discussed those with you and built those into the recommended budget. Post-workshop, based on input from your board and the public and departments, we've addressed some of those expansions, and that leaves the last kind of section that is here for your board's consideration today. Here are the pre-workshop. I won't go through all of these. We've talked about those. The recommended expansions that are incorporated in the recommended budget, I will talk more about those. We have the CEO's office management intern. We've used some one-time dollars to set money aside for 2 years to support this effort. We've discussed that at workshop. Community services, the regional climate action planning, $324,000. General services, although this is non-general fund, but general services fiscal security specialist, $174,000. Plan development, the farm stays project, $115,000. Probation, $36,000 for their pretrial assessment. This is the transition of pretrial from core special services to probation mid-year. And this is the incremental general fund costs associated with that transfer. Within public defender, additional misdemeanor attorney staffing of 1 FTE, as well as some extra help FSA social worker program funding. Within sheriff, as your board discussed during workshop, and it was clear was a priority, was the behavioral science unit manager, as well as the COBAM MDC replacement. This brings us to the last section of expansion requests. These are the ones outstanding from departments that have not been funded as part of the recommended budget that are here for your board's consideration. If we look at those by department, community services has 3. There's additional library funding requested by the department of ongoing GFC of $135,000. I will skip to the chase at the end. The recommended budget does allocate all of the county's ongoing dollars, but there are some one-time dollars for your board's consideration. But as we're going through this list of ongoing versus one-time, if you keep that in the back of your mind, that'd be appreciated. CCE startup capital balance, the department's requested an additional $750,000. This augments their existing $650,000 they have in fund balance for this purpose. We have the request for a countywide recreational master plan. This is really kind of part 2. They funded part 1 in the current fiscal year. That request is for $350,000. General Services has a remaining request to add a real property agent for $126,000. Human Services has 2 remaining requests, although several have been funded. One's for Department Business Specialists for recruiting, $125,000, and one for an FOP for their administration of $67,500. Public Works has requests identified that are still outstanding. Local share of the 2019 storm-related costs, $1.3 million. This gets spread across their various funds. Maintenance funding to maintain current PCI of 57 at $5.5 million. And the local share of the Thomas Fire and debris flow costs across their different funds, $1.1 million. Sheriff gets a whole slide to themselves. So there are 8 requests, expansion requests that are still outstanding at this point in the budget. Main jail room consolidation, although I will tell you that this is something that we plan on doing, incorporated into the remodel of the main jail when that takes place. And so we will address this control room consolidation as part of that larger project. So although it still shows an expansion request, we do have a plan to address that. Custody deputies, 13.8 FTE. Our plan on that is to, as we discussed during the workshop, to re-engage CGL. CGL is the firm that performed an assessment on the county's behalf with respect to a number of things, but specifically related to the need for custody deputies within the jail system. We'd like to re-engage those. There's a number of factors that have changed since that report was first put together, and we think it's worthy of a refresh on that review. This department also has a request for a data systems analyst, $141,000. Records management replacement system replacement, $582,000. Dispatch governance group funding of $100,000. Request for chief deputy sheriff for $352,000. A F1 FTE to manage the body-worn cameras and computer systems, as well as to expand their body-worn camera program. You can see that's $133,400 for the staff person, and the $514 was for the expansion of the cameras. And then finally, a data center replacement of one-time cost of $1.3 million and ongoing cost of $133.5. In addition, we've had some things that have come to our attention post workshops. There are 4, and you can see 2 of them are grayed out. I'll talk about those. Your board considered a report from CSD with respect to encouraging, how do we encourage or change our plans to encourage greater green commute, alternative commute options for our employees. And although your board referred that back to HR for consideration, we do think it's prudent if your board would consider earmarking some dollars today for ultimately that program once that comes back to your board for approval. We think that would be prudent for you to do. We've also, as we talked about during workshops actually, the need to do additional compliance audits, ongoing compliance audits within the cannabis industry to ensure that the taxes received by the county are appropriate and complete. We think there's an work effort there that's values about $175,000. We also got the next 2 kind of requests, and it turns out that they really aren't needed to be discussed today necessarily, although I feel compelled to talk about them because they were in our board letter, was the request from South Coast Workforce Home Buyer Program. It turns out that the nonprofit is actually already working with our HR department on this effort, so there isn't a need for additional budgetary resources today. And then there was a request, identified need for the Veterans Memorial Building there on the beach to make some emergency repairs associated with the water damage. And so General Services has agreed to prioritize this project as part of their 18% funding, and we'll address that in the upcoming year. So no additional dollars or resources are needed today. So with that, Board, that kind of is our opening summary, and I'd be happy to answer any questions and pause at this time before we move into the functional group summaries.
Okay, thank you very much. Do we have any questions from board members on the opening? Okay, I'm going to open it up to public comment at this point for any members of the public that would wish to speak just on the opening remarks and the summary.
Chair Levanino and members of the board, we have one request to speak on general budget overview, and that's Andy Caldwell.
Chairman Lavanino, members of the board, Andy Caldwell representing CoLab. I'm going to spare you today because I spoke so much during April and there's not a heck of a lot of new information in this. So I'm not going to be speaking more than likely for the rest of the day unless I can't stand it.
Can we get a can we get a second on that? Everybody?
Yes.
Yeah.
I'm just going to give you a bird's eye perspective of what we see in this budget. It's extremely troubling. And I think Mona Miyasada does a phenomenal job. Her staff does a phenomenal job. But, you know, they're basically, if we were going to take an Elks Rodeo scenario, they're riding hoping that the bell rings. Well, the bell doesn't ring in this contest that we're in. And the bottom line, that top chart there talks about staff levels and costs. They continue to rise. And then below that, regular salaries and benefits continue to rise. When we first started monitoring the budget, staff costs were in the 40% of the whole budget. Now they're 60% or probably a little over 60%. That, one of your favorite words, unsustainable. And we'll go to the next page and tell you why. What's lost, because so much of your budget comes from the state and feds, what's lost on you is the connection to the local economy, in our opinion, that government should reflect in the health and well-being of the local economy. And we know that this chart breaks down, the top part breaks down distribution of household income. And now it lumps together, the big one in the middle lumps together 50 to 99,000. We know that from the census that the average household income in this county is between $60,000 to $75,000 a year. What does that mean? That's two people working in a house are earning about $75,000 a year. That means it takes four of them. It takes four people or two households to pay for one county employee. 4 people in the private sector to employ one county worker. And the problem here is the news is really worse than that, because the overwhelming majority of the people, you look at the chart on the bottom, families below the poverty level. Santa Maria, 16%. Lompoc, 16.9%. Guadalupe, 13.1%. Solvang, can't figure that one out for the life of me. But the bottom line here is the chart next to it. You've got 41,000 people in the North County. Again, that split between North, South, Mid-County is fallacious. It shouldn't be there. It's North and South. We have no such thing as Mid-County. It's 41,000 people to 21,000 in the South, i.e. twice the poverty rate in the North County. So here's the deal. The stock market has been about as high as it's ever been. Unemployment has been as low as it's ever been in decades. And yet you still have 60% of the kids in this county on some form of welfare or government aid. 60%. My message to you is things aren't going to get any better. The stock market's high, unemployment's low, and you've got a permanent urban underclass living in abject poverty. The solution to that is not more government. The solution to that is better paying jobs. CoLab was created because those best paying jobs are being destroyed by regulations, taxes, and other overwrought considerations from government. That's why we were formed 28 years ago. And I'm here to tell you, we only have one sector left. We only have one sector left in this county that will lift those people out of poverty and give you the tax revenue that you need to pay your bills, and that's the oil industry. People with a high school education can make $100,000 a year. You have too many people in the North County that don't speak English or Spanish. They're not going to get a job in high tech. They may have an 8th grade education, if that. They need to be able to work with their hands in manufacturing and industry. We have one sector left, and the virtue signaling we're hearing is you want to shut it down, which would make all of those stats worse and your own bottom line worse. That's our message. We would ask that you would start looking at the stats. When Mike Brown was CEO, he used to have this thing called the scan. The scan was that page ad infinitum. It was dozens of pages with stats, including, for instance, and I'll wrap up with this, the number of Hispanic males in this county taking STEM classes was 6%. When you guys think about what shoe you want to put on this county in terms of economic wherewithal and living, the shoe you're trying to fit us for doesn't work. It may work here in the South County. South County, as Joni Gray used to say, is in an entirely different world than the North. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other requests to speak?
Chair Lavanino, members of the board, that was our only request to speak.
Okay, so that takes us to our first functional group. How we want to do this, Mr. Frapwell or Mona? Do you want us to, so it's Health and Human Services. Go ahead, take it away.
Mr. Chair, members of the board. So the items, we're going to talk about these functional groups, and they're indicated here on the summary slide. We'll talk about public safety, community resources, and public facilities, as well as these others that are policy, general government, health and human services, and general county programs. And you can see the percentage of the total budget that each one represents. Our first group is Health and Human Services. Health and Human Services is comprised of 5 departments: social services, behavioral wellness, public health, child support services, and first 5. The chart that you have in front of you shows their total operating revenues and then the portion of their revenues that come from the general fund contribution. For instance, for social services, the general fund contribution makes up about 5% of their total budget. Behavioral wellness, about 4% of the total budget. Public health, 10%. And child support and first 5 solely rely on their own operating revenues and do not rely on discretionary general fund dollars. So with that, we can pause. If your board has questions specifically about any of these departments, department heads are here for questions that your board might have.
Okay, are there any questions? Would anybody like to speak with any of the department heads from our first functional group? Supervisor Williams.
Well, just a question. There was about a couple $1 million in doubt in the state budget for public health, and then there was some that could be affected by the IHSS program questions and social services. Maybe just take the opportunity to go,
Yeah.
problem solved, or what's the status at this point?
Why don't we just start at the top and go through each one of them? So let's start off with social services.
And I don't need super detailed. I just want to kind of know the latest.
Here comes.
And we got Dan the man to tell us.
So Supervisor Williams, through the chair, I understand your questions about IHSS. So far, everything still looks good, as we had looked at back in April in terms of the projection of the governor's budget containing the state general funds and kind of reversing the prior action from a couple of years ago related to IHSS. We're still waiting to hear the outcome of the IHSS MOE issue in terms of whether everybody's going to be at 4% or some counties are going to be at 7% versus 4%, depending upon whether or not they have active MOUs with their labor unions and whether or not they're above the minimum wage. But that's the only issue that I can see that's currently still in flux that I anticipate hearing on sometime this week in terms of how that ended up being resolved. But we're looking good. No changes since the April budget workshop.
Thank you.
Chair Lavenue and supervisors, we also had money set aside from a prior year to assist with that, and that's still set aside.
Okay. Okay, and then your other question was with public health, an update? Dr. Reynoso?
Good morning, Chair Williams, through the board, through the chair. So you had a question about AB 85. We were successful in our defense of that realignment dollars. So we do have the $2.1 million set aside for the core public health services. So that's a great win for us.
That's huge for public health. That's
Yes.
great. That's a lot. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Frapwell, are there any other questions of that functional group? We're all good? Okay.
Mr. Chair and members of the board, so the public safety is comprised of 6
Oh, I'm
departments.
sorry. I have public comment for functional group, Health and Human Services. Are there any requests to speak from the public?
Chair Levanino and members of the board, we have no requests to speak.
Okay. Very good. Sorry about that.
No problem. So 6 departments represented in this functional group: sheriff, fire, probation, district attorney, court special services, and public defender. And again, you can see on this slide the amount of their operations that are covered by their operating revenues, their own operating revenues, versus the general fund contribution of discretionary dollars. Sheriff has the largest percentage of this group that's funded by the general fund discretionary dollars, 57%. Fire, of course, is self-sustaining within the district funds. Probation, 47% funded by the general fund. DA, 56%. Court special services, about 64%. And finally, public defender at 67%. And so with that, be happy to answer any questions or have discussion on public safety departments.
Supervisor Williams.
Well, I'd love from the Sheriff's Department and from the budget director's perspective, if there's a real need for staffing in the jail, correctional officers, and we want to make a dent in that, but obviously with $1 million, we're not even going to make a dent in that. So what I've discussed with the CEO how else we could take care of that, and you guys had a good proposal, better than my initial one. So you want to tell me explain how that works?
Supervisor Williams, through the chair. So I think to address that, there's kind of 2 steps to that. And I think I mentioned earlier the need to refresh our CGL study. That's really going to serve as a definitive baseline and give us a direction of where we need to go with respect to funding of additional custody deputy positions. We know that's a need. Your board has allocated significant additional custody deputies through the last 3 years as part of the Northern Branch Jail Funding Program. That's provided some immediate relief even here in the South County until that new Northern Branch Jail opens. We know that when that jail opens, that those custody deputies will shift to the new facility. What we're expecting in the CGL refresh is to look at that transition, give us a fresh look on the mix of inmates and the number of inmates in each facility, and help us identify the number of additional custody deputies that will be needed for the system as a whole. A couple of other things have changed since that initial study. One is your board adopted a new civilian classification that's able to do control rooms. That reduces the number of custody deputies needed originally identified in the CGL study. So that needs to be looked at and how that folds in. And the final piece that we expect from the CGL study is to look at the timing of the need. We know that when we open the Northern Branch Jail, we're going to use that as an opportunity as we move those detainees from the main jail to Northern Branch Jail. We're going to need to make some improvements in the main jail. We've been talking about that for a number of years, and that would be the timing to do so. And so what that does is allows us to look at when the phasing of additional, how many new custody deputies we'll ultimately need when both facilities are fully functioning, and then also look at the timing of when those positions are needed. So we think that study is going to be key in identifying the number of new deputies that are needed. And then once we have that and understand the timing and the number needed, we'll come back to your board mid-year, if that's the appropriate time, to address the additional funding needed for the balance of the current fiscal year.
I would just ask the Sheriff's Department and the Sheriff, is that route one that you can envision addressing this need?
Chair Lavanino and Supervisor Williams, yes, I think that it does make sense that we have to do the planning process first. The remodel has not been fully decided upon yet, and that will drive some of the staffing numbers. I just think it's really important to recognize that whether it's 17 or 15 or 13, whatever it turns out to be, there is going to be a need for additional custody staff. It is kind of a moving target because of some changes not only to the physical plant but also to what could potentially be happening statewide in terms of bail reform and in terms of alternatives to custody. There's a lot of discussion and a lot of movement in that area now. So I suspect that, I can't give you an exact number today, none of us can, but I just want this to be on everybody's radar that this is going to be an issue, and we are going to have an immediate impact once the new jail does open and transferring all the people over to the operations of the new facility. So I just want to make sure that, we recognize that the likelihood is that we're not going to have numbers for you today, but I think this idea of doing a reopener essentially mid-year and looking at where we are is the way to go.
And in the meantime, there is sufficient funding to not hold off on recruitment because you have ongoing needs.
Correct. You've given us the opportunity to, once we fill our positions, to overhire some staff and work them through the background process and what have you, and we will be doing that. As mentioned, we also have, we're bringing on board sheriff service technicians and looking at alternative ways to utilize sworn staff in the facilities, and we are also hopeful that as we progress through this redesign of the main jail, the remodel, the repurposing of it, if you will, that some aspects of that may result through design in some cost savings in terms of staff.
Thank you, Sheriff.
Supervisor Adam.
I'm just wondering if we gave you more money for cannabis enforcement, could you use it?
We could always use it.
I know, but cannabis enforcement.
Yes. I mean, I think that, I just have to give a shout out to our cannabis compliance team. They've just done extraordinary work in the short time that they've been up and running. And they are, I don't know how much longer they're going to be able to sort of sustain the momentum that they have. But there's no question that as we move forward, as we continue to send the message out to the community, that we are not going to be tolerant of illicit grows and illicit retail of marijuana, and give the legal market the chance that it deserves to thrive, then we're going to see that in the future. And I think that it's really important. There's certainly always a need for some additional resources, and we'll be in discussions with the CEO about that as we move forward. We are, going to, continue and have continued. It's a pretty target-rich environment out there right now. So we're continuing to have good luck in terms of sending the strong message. And again, I just want to give kudos to my staff that are doing a wonderful job.
Yeah, it's my perception that we have a lot, and you said target-rich environment. There's a lot of bad actors out there that need to be cleaned up before this thing settles down, and you get all the legal actors blessed and permitted and everything.
There's also a very significant narcotics problem that's unrelated to the cannabis industry per se, and we have fewer resources to address that problem than we've ever had since I've been here as well. So a lot of that is due to the cutbacks that have occurred, that we've had to put in place as a result of the recession and in the heels of the recession. So it's really a twofold process of looking at how we address the cannabis compliance and all of that, but it's also, we can't lose sight of the fact that we have an opioid epidemic, we have a significant amount of methamphetamine and other drugs that are in our county, and we have a reduced capacity to address that problem compared to where we were in the past.
Okay, well, maybe we can do something for you.
Thank you.
Supervisor Williams.
I was just going to ask Jeff to put up that slide because we are putting increased, as Jeff just went over, we are putting increased monies into the enforcement team. But I also want to chime in the agreement that to me the main problem that the sheriff has is in recruitment and retention, and if he can expand the drug enforcement team, I think that's something that we could get 4 votes for mid-year, because if you have that opportunity, I think that would be something that the board should be friendly to.
Yeah, Supervisor Williams, we're making great strides in terms of recruitment and filling our vacancies, and I have complete confidence that we will be able to fill our positions, and also that we'll be able, if the board so chooses, that we could expand the compliance team as well.
Okay, I've got 2 things. One is I just wanted to point out, as Supervisor Hart mentioned as well, it is a 50% increase from 1819 to 1920 in the Sheriff's Department for enforcement. So I'm excited to see that. I had a question about the, and I don't know who might have the answer to this one, but the other thing the cannabis tax is paying for is the in-camera videos in the cars. And somebody just refresh my memory. I don't remember if that's doing the entire fleet, or was it just what we were going to spend this fiscal year? Does 1.3 take care of the entire fleet, or was there some rollout? It does. Okay. Getting a head shake, yes.
I'm getting a nod that yes.
Okay, very good. Well, that's significant also, so very good. Thank you. Any other questions of the sheriff, or we good? All right, thank you, Sheriff. So, public comment on public safety. There are no speakers.
Chair Lavanino and members of the board, we have no requests to speak.
Okay, let's then move into functional group, community resources, and public facilities.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In this category, we have 4 departments represented: Public Works, Community Services, Planning and Development Services, and the Ag Commissioner Weights and Measures. Public Works, in their totality of all their funds and departments, requires about 2% from the general fund as a discretionary revenue. Community Services, 41%. Planning and Development, 15%. And finally, Ag, about 20%, 26% of their operations are funded from discretionary dollars. So with that, I'd be happy to entertain any questions on these 4 departments.
Okay, are there any questions of the board? I've got one. I'd like, if we could get our Planning Development Director, Lisa Plowman, just wanted to ask a question. It's funny, all of our questions are hanging around cannabis for some reason. So, I know you have a significant backlog of permit applications, and there's a lot going on in there. And I just want to know how you're stacking up personnel-wise, and how you feel about that, and if you feel like you have the manpower, and if not, what are we doing about it?
Mr. Chair, members of the board, we do have a number of applications in. The total is about 117 applications that we're processing right now. We did receive authorization to add 2 cannabis staff.
So that was during the April workshop?
That was
correct?
during the April workshop, and we're working on doing that. We're undergoing recruitments right now, but we've determined, and we've spoken to the CEO about it, that we probably need to add 2 more staff to the cannabis team so that we can ensure that we can move the applications through the process and address any of the appeals that we're going to see throughout the process. And so we have lists through with HR that we've developed for the planner 1, 2, and 3 positions that we'll be filling. So I think with the 4 more staff, we'll be able to process the applications at a reasonable time.
Okay, very good. And then it's not budget related, I guess, but kind of in the same vein is I feel a lot of these will probably be appealed. Do we have a strategy, I guess, for dealing with what the Planning Commission is going to look like and what that increased workload is going to be for you?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, members of the board. We've been working with the chair of the Planning Commission on identifying dates when we can stack up appeals for cannabis to address them. We just made it through our first cannabis appeal last week. And there was a 4-1 decision to deny the appeal. So we'll be looking at holding special hearings if necessary on maybe an additional Wednesday or another day to try and accommodate that schedule.
Perfect. Okay. Thank you very much. Any other questions for this functional group? Supervisor Williams?
So this is a question for community services, just the question concerning the homelessness funding in the state budget. One of the things that we were attempting to jockey for is have the same kind of direct allocation that the big cities have been allocated in the budget, and I don't know how that ended up in the last week. But it's sort of the difference between us having automatic funding in the state budget and having to compete with essentially our community partners for funding. And I just wanted to know if you knew the outcome of that debate.
Supervisor Williams, through the chair, we haven't heard anything yet. We will keep checking on that and keep pushing it. Yeah.
Great.
Any other questions? Are there any requests to speak from the public?
Chair Levanino and members of the board, we have no requests to speak.
All right. Well, according to the agenda, we are to break for lunch. I see Supervisor Adams already taking us up on that. Are you guys all going to be able to make it through?
I'm going to defend Supervisor Adams. I think I eat more from the DS than he does. So can
I
make
thought
a
you were such a slave driver that you weren't going to take a break. So I got myself fixed up.
That was probably good thinking. All right. So we will skip lunch. We're going to fight right through. And we are going to go to functional group, general government and support services. Mr. Frappwell.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the board. This functional group is represented by 7 departments: general services, clerk, recorder, assessor, audit controller, human resources, treasurer, tax collector, and also the department used from the north to capture the northern branch jail project, as well as debt service. So with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions. You can see the breakdown of operating revenue versus the use of discretionary revenues for each one of these departments.
Okay, are there any questions from the board? See, none. I've got one, and I know I brought it to the CEO. I can't remember the answer now, so I'll bring it up now because I think we're going to talk about it later. But the tax compliance audit, okay, now I was thinking I was going to remember. Okay, so I just want to make sure how we're going to deal with that. If you need us to allocate resources for a cannabis tax compliance audit, and if that would be in-house or outside, or how we're going to deal with that.
Mr. Chairman, in response to that, we'll talk about that in the deliberations section. We've identified that as a potential allocation for your board's consideration.
Right. Okay, very good. Are there any requests to speak from the public on this functional group?
Chair Levanino and members of the board, we have no requests to speak.
Okay, Wow. So I'm going to bring it back to the board. So I don't know if we're ready to go into, if you want to put up are there any just general comments, or do we want to get into we have another functional group? Oh, it's on the back page. All right. I don't know if we can cram it all in today. Sure. Policy and executive. Policy and executive functional group.
And it is a
Mr. Frapwell.
It is a functional group. Perhaps some would argue it's dysfunctional group, but nonetheless.
Oh, man.
Nonetheless, it is comprised of 4 departments: County Executive Office, County Council, and Board of Supervisors, as well as the General County Programs Group. And I want to take this opportunity. I inadvertently caused some level of consternation with council in my earlier comments, and I'd like to take an opportunity to correct that so that I can stay in a good standing with council.
Okay.
When I was talking about the available fund balances, especially related to assessment appeals, I mentioned those funds would be available for outside counsel. Just for clarification, they would be available for outside expert witnesses associated with large cases and not outside counsel. So thank you, Mr. Gazzoni, and I stand corrected.
He is listening. It's good.
You know, he told me earlier that he was going to be focused on some other important pressing matters, but apparently he was paying attention to my comments. So you know, I try to throw him for a loop, but you know, he's always vigilant. So with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions regarding these 4 departments.
Okay. Any questions about our own departments here? Seeing none? Okay. Any comments from the public on this functional group?
Chair Levanino, members of the board, we have no requests to speak.
All right, I'll go back to Mr. Frapwell for summary, and then we'll come back to the board for deliberation.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the board. So just as a reminder, although it wasn't very long ago, so it's still all fresh in your mind, but there were several expansion requests deferred to hearings from various departments. We talked about those earlier. We talked about those requests that were received after workshops. The 2 remaining that have not been addressed are the alternative commute options for employees, setting aside funds to ultimately implement whatever your board decides ultimately for the policy, as well as the cannabis tax compliance audits to ensure that the county receives the appropriate cannabis tax revenues from the industry. And with that, your board, we've identified $1,086,100 in available one-time dollars. As I mentioned before, it comes from 3 sources. You recall back when we were talking about the discretionary key fund balances, the available cannabis tax revenues that have not yet been allocated in the recommended budget, $889,000. Remaining carryover balances in the Program Stabilization Fund, $171,800. And finally, the amount in the emerging issues carryover fund balance, $24,700. So that's a total of $1,086,100. And those are really the dollars that your board has in front of you today to address any expansion needs that have been identified or those new items that have come to your attention today. So with that, really, it's really time for deliberation, and we can go through our usual attachment E process in which we can, if your board desires, put our attachment E spreadsheet on the screen and take feedback from your board.
Okay, before we do that, we're going to open it up one more time for, Supervisor Hart has his light on?
Yes.
Or is this deliberation, or because we did have public comment before we get into deliberation? Sorry. Okay, public comment on the summary.
Chair Levanino, members of the board, yes, we have 1 request to speak on budget summary and wrap-up, and that's Andy Caldwell.
Chairman Levanino, members of the board, Andy Caldwell representing CoLab. Last comment here before you go into these deliberations is there is a technical/legal definition of balanced, and there's a practical reality. One of the things that your staff has, your public works staff has on that slide, is they need something like $5 million to not slide deeper into debt. Now, this is a debt that's unlike other debts, that it grows exponentially. If you don't fix your roads in an adequate time frame and manner, you have to rebuild them entirely. There comes a point where you can no longer fix them, you have to rebuild them, and I don't remember if it's 5 to 7 times the cost of repairs. So what your staff has up there, it should have warning lights that we need 5 million. I think the pavement index was 57, going on my memory, to not slide below that. Supervisor Adam has a board inquiry form there, which has not been put up in terms of what's been happening to your overall maintenance debt. I agree with you guys, you're putting more money into maintenance, and with the state gas tax, you're putting more into roads than probably ever in my 28 years, but it's not enough. Your budget is not balanced if you're going further and further into the hole. You've kind of got a little bit of a wrap on pensions right now because of cost sharing from the employees and the fact that the stock market's up and all that sort of stuff. But there's this gaping hole there. And I want to juxtapose that gaping hole, which is a fundamental role of government to protect and maintain infrastructure. You got something like $400 million versus 3 items on here that are completely redundant and superfluous. $324,000 for climate. I think the figure for community choice aggregation was well over $500,000. I didn't have time to go back and look it up. And how much? $750,000. So we're already over $1 million. Plus, I spoke to you a few weeks ago how you're all stick when it comes to the private sector reducing greenhouse gases, but you're all carrot for your own employees. You're already giving people vacation and time off and discounted passes, but you want to throw another $100,000 to try to get your employees to follow your lead on climate change, commuting, and things like that. That's those 3 things are well over $1 million that should be going towards getting you out of road infrastructure and maintenance debt. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. We'll bring it back to begin our deliberations. Do you want to throw up the chart, and then we'll lead it off with Supervisor Hart?
Thank you, Chair Lavanito. As the new person on the board, I have been doing field trips and site visits around the county, and I'm extraordinarily impressed by all the people that I'm working with and the hardworking county employees and the facilities that we have. And this budget presentation, I think, does a really good job of describing all the great work that's being done. But a couple of things came to my attention just in the last couple of weeks that I think I would love to throw into the mix for conversations. Small projects, little things that could be I think make a big difference for the folks who are doing the work. Up in Supervisor Lavanino's district in Santa Maria, the district attorney's office has a plan to remodel their facilities. They have their employees are very cramped in their workspace, doubling up in offices. One of the tightest workspaces that I saw in all my tours around in county departments, and they are looking to do some very small improvements. I have a list here of about $35,000 in improvements to the physical space that they work in, a ceiling replacement where they have tiles falling off of the roof, doing some more space assessment, and a break room renovation that I think would make a really big difference to those employees and demonstrate the board's support for their work conditions. And then similarly, out at the Animal Services Department, went on a tour of the shelter out in Goleta and the places where the public interacts with the staff are in need of improvement and refreshing, particularly the waiting room when folks come in and meet the staff, and also the facilities where folks take their animals to be euthanized. That's a really delicate, difficult moment in somebody's interaction with their pet and our staff, and both those facilities really need a little bit of work. And I think $40,000 there would go a long way to improving that connection to the department and the public. So those are just 2 things. I apologize for putting them in at the last minute, but as I said, I've been touring around and seeing these things, and these particular items really struck me as deserving of at least a little bit of conversation and hopefully some support here today.
Okay, Supervisor Hart, did you want to talk about your other deliberations, or other what, the items that already
If
been
you
identified?
want
or-
me to start, I can do that too.
Well, if you'd
Sure.
like to,
Yes.
yeah.
Okay.
Let's do
while
that.
I'm here. Let's see.
Mona. Okay, go ahead, Greg.
Okay, so let me see what we're looking at here. So this does not have the items that we're suggesting, and what you're suggesting is that I go.
No,
ahead-
no. Let's wait until we. Can we get the chart up that has all of our? We don't want to have to. Do you want us to just read them off, or do you want us
Right.
to? Do you have a chart that we can just put our names?
We haven't populated this part of the chart. So
Oh, you haven't. Okay.
Okay, well I can do them. I haven't.
We can do it.
I haven't written
Okay.
down.
We got it. Why don't
Well,
you lead off.
starting at the very top of the list, I would be supportive of the $135,000 for libraries. I don't believe, from the conversations that I've had, that the full allocation for community choice energy is necessary. I don't know what the magic number is for that. Look for some direction from staff, but I think $250,000 would help that project move forward, keep it on track. The recreational master plan, I'm supportive of fully funding. I think I might be skipping, but definitely interested in having the cannabis tax compliance effort, the $175,000 included in this year's budget, the $100,000 for the commute alternatives.
Okay, hold on just a second.
Am I going too fast?
No,
Yep.
they've gotten a lot better at this.
we do have crack staff.
Yes.
Good.
All right.
We're going to run out of columns.
Breath.
What's that?
We're going to run out of columns.
No, it's all going to add up.
This
Watch.
is a D2 thing.
It's
Here we go.
magic, yes. And then the two additional things that I have created from my field trips, additional
They're up
$35,000
there. Yeah.
for the district attorney's office.
Yep.
I'll really slow down here. So
No,
we
she-
can-
they-
oh,
he's
you
got
already
those
have
too.
those. Look at that.
Yes, they are good.
Oh my gosh, that's impressive. All right, and I think the magic number, if my calculator, there we go.
Oh my gosh, you came in with 1,000. You can leave here with $1,100 in a gift certificate.
And I'll gladly leave that up to my colleagues to divide.
Oh, thank you. All right, very good. Well thought out. All right. Who wants to go next? Supervisor Williams.
Well, first of all, I believe the 135,000 for libraries is needed.
So I have a question on that.
Sure.
So while we're talking about that, so how?
And
What
I
is-
was about to say it would be great if it was more, but I don't know how much more
No, that's
we
not what I
have.
was going to say.
Right.
What I was going to ask is, so I'm not part of the ad hoc or anything, and I don't know how this all is going to get divvied up. So how did we arrive at 135, and where's it going to go? Because I'm hearing a lot from the Orchid
So
Library.
I can answer that question.
Okay.
So what we deliberated about a little bit in the previous budget hearings was to offer, so there's approximately 400,000 if it's just small libraries. If you include the large libraries, more like $700,000 worth of deficits. So, if we had tons of money, we could just cover it all. But what we offered to do is to match cities on a one-for-one basis to cover the deficit in the small cities, and the friends groups in the places that don't have cities. Montecito, Orchid, Los Alamos. So that's what our allocation would be. So
that's
in,
the
in
only-
the small cities, we're only covering half of the deficit, but the cities hopefully will cover the other half of the deficit. In the places with no cities, we'd be covering for this amount of money 2/3 of the deficit.
Okay.
So they're actually getting more than the ones with cities.
Okay.
So I definitely think it's $135,000. If we had more, I would want to give more, but I'm worried we really don't. I also agree with the cannabis tax compliance. I believe there is a number out there to continue our CCE work, and that the minimum number, as I've been told, is about $430,000. So I believe that if this board really wants to go forward with CCE and not kill it quietly. We've got to allocate the money to move forward. That's what I've heard is our priority in the past. So, and I agree with that. And things are so bad with the utilities right now. It's hard to see how we could do worse. I agree with the alternative commute, though I don't know if we have the money to fully fund it. And I also agree that we should do the recreation master plan. Not sure out of this that we have the money to fully fund it, but I think that if we took 170,000 from our program stabilization and added it to this, we could make that math work out. I will remind the board that we have taken money out all of the last 3 years out of the shoe boxes, and yet our shoe boxes keep on growing. I guess I'm going to invoke a little Supervisor Janet Wolf here, that our reserves should have a functional policy purpose, and so it is not, in my view, sacrosanct not to take some money out of reserves, since we're constantly adding to them at the same time. And mind you, reserves tend to go down in the case of emergencies. Even though we've been through some terrible emergencies in the last year and a half, our reserves have continued to grow. My view is we fully fund Rec Master Plan and the alternative commute, and if we need to take somewhere between 100 and 170 out of the program stabilization, then we do that.
Okay. Well, since that's been brought up as an alternative, I'd like to talk to Mr. Frapwell about what is that money in that shoebox for?
Mr. Chair and Supervisor Williams, specific to your question, the available dollars of the $171,800 that was remaining unallocated in the program stabilization fund is included in the $1,086,000. So,
okay, so that's already taken. That shoebox is empty.
Then contingency, which we have $4 million in, or something else that is not our non-emergency reserves, is what I would advocate for.
Okay. All right. Well, appreciate the fact you didn't go way over.
And if people agree with the North County DA North County office and the Animal Services, I think it would be appropriate to also take that out of reserves. I mean, using reserves for capital is not fiscally unsound thing to do. In some ways, if we're going to spend more money in the future than we would if we delay capital expenses, it's a responsible approach.
Okay. Can we just talk about, just for a second, just get a perspective on where we are with jail costs and construction and how that's all firmed up at this point? Because I just want to make sure that we have adequate funding in our reserves, that if we do run into a cost overrun, which seems likely, that we've got money in there.
Mr. Chairman, specifically to that question, I think that we are nearing completion of the Northern Branch Jail. We have a number of outstanding issues that we have some concern about with respect to construction costs. We know that we will likely be in a contentious relationship with our development team after the project is finally delivered, and so that is likely to require additional resources to address.
And if you did address those overruns, what pot of money would those be coming out of? Was that be coming out of contingency?
That would likely come out of contingencies. That would be the first contingencies. Let me just speak a little bit to contingencies. So, if you look at the general fund, so the contingencies there for general fund, uncertainties, et cetera, that $4 million represents about 1% of the total revenue coming to the general fund. Now, I have tremendous faith in my staff and the audit controller staff and the department staff as we look at developing those revenue estimates for the upcoming year. So I don't suggest that our revenues are at risk, but I would say 1% movement a 1% contingencies for those types of things is not imprudent. I think that's appropriate. I mean, I talked a little bit earlier, as we talked about available fund balances, the reserves as a whole, so that incorporates all the reserves that we have allocated on that, identified on that one slide that I had earlier, is still about $9 to $10 million shy of what GFA recommends that at a minimum we maintain. So I appreciate we have strong reserves. I don't want to intimate that we are fiscally unsound, but I wouldn't say that we are over-reserved. And so my recommendation is try to resist taking additional fund balances, but at the end of the day, I appreciate and recognize, respect that is your ultimate policy decision.
Okay, very good. Mr. Ghazzani?
Chair, I think each year the board has been hearing from the treasurer on the benefit, if the county goes out onto the debt market or short-term borrowing, of being able to certify that it stays within its budget principles on that. And the treasurer is probably the person who could address what that certification looks like. And what Mr. Frappwell said matches up with that you have some discretion in this area as long as you stay inside that policy.
Okay. Do you want to comment on that at all, or I think that's kind of Mr. Hagan, would you like to comment on that? Not that $100,000 is going to make a difference.
If they're skating that close on the recommendation, that would be very unlike them.
So, Chair Levinino, members of the board, Mike's absolutely correct. You know what Jeff presented earlier about 60 days of expenditures being in reserves. The rating agencies do look at that when they rate our debt. So there's some truth to that having healthy reserves actually helps our rating, and it reduces our financing costs.
Okay.
So I guess my question would be, would $178,000 less when we're adding several million to our reserves this year make or break that?
I would hope that wouldn't move the needle, but that's up to the rating agencies, really.
I mean, I wasn't going to go here, but like staff's recommendations have come so close to the wire, including spending a lot of our last year's unexpended cannabis revenue, that if we can't decide to do a couple projects that have, 4 zeros or 5 zeros after them, then I'm not sure what we have a board of supervisors for.
Well, I'll get to that in a minute. Yeah. Thank you.
Good. Okay.
So I got a question about CCE too, because it looks like we're going to be all over the map from 0 to 450 or whatever. So, Mr. Chapjian, if you could come forward and just kind of give us the real scoop and where we stand with consultant work that's supposed to bring back something to our ad hoc committee.
Chair Levinino, thank you. We just received the draft from PEA, our consultants. The numbers are looking viable, potentially viable for a CCE. Unlike the previous one had us in the black sooner than this one. This one would take probably about 3 years to be in the black, but it is viable with potential revenue sources cumulative to about the $60 million range in about 10 years. So, but there are also some other options for the board as well.
What is that?
Which is Monterey County
what would that
Authority.
cost us?
Probably about $5,000, but we're looking into governance and those kind of issues. Okay. But we are looking into it, and we could come back with those options once we get all the
So when do you think, what kind of timeline are you on to bring back something with a recommendation?
I think July. I think August is when we have to make some sort of decision with Monterey and ours as well, so because it pushes off a year.
Yeah. Okay. Very good. Thank you very much. All right. Supervisor Adam.
All right. Well, I guess the first thing I want to do is just go through the numbers here, and I would just take 889 and add it to the cannabis enforcement team, because it's cannabis money, and we thought we talked about that during the budget workshops earlier where we were going to use all the cannabis money for cannabis enforcement. And I think you're in a time here where you really need to put a lot of effort into this until things settle down. And I don't know if they ever will, but it seems like things are pretty burning pretty hot right now in that whole area. And so I'd like to just see that all committed to that effort until that thing gets organized in some fashion. And then I'd take the rest of the money, the $171,800 and the $24,700, and just put that on top of the one-time maintenance column. And then I'd like to go to my BIF 3 and take a look at that, because that should be just frightening to everybody. Okay, I don't know if we could blow that up so that you can see the bottom numbers, the columns. That's going up 50% in 6 years. You know, if that continues on at that rate, that's just going to be, you know, you're going to have a hard time catching that now. And, you know, if you really think about what we added to the 18-19 number, which was 400 million, you know, that was 453 million that was going to land on for this year, the 1920 number. So now we're going to throw 22 at it, and it's going up 38. So, you know, that's just out of control, and it's irresponsible. And unless we just abdicate and just say, okay, well, we'll never catch up. I don't know how else you start to tackle that other than to start really cutting into things and making some sacrifices and not acting like we're out of the woods, which is sort of what we've done here. We've sort of declared victory, I think prematurely, and decided that we didn't have any service level reductions or cuts, and that's nice, but then there's that. And, you know, I realize I kind of sound like a broken record all the time on this issue, but then there's the numbers, and they're real. So, and, you know, I didn't make them up. It's a BIF. These guys made them up. So, and I don't know, did you make them up or did you figure them out? You figured them out, right. So,
Mr. Chair,
right.
I have a suggestion, because I completely agree that this is there needs to be a plan for investment. And of course, I do believe that the really responsible way for us to handle it would be to do a sales tax, but I know you guys aren't going for that today. So my suggestion to put a marker so we make some progress on this, I'm not saying it solves it, but is instead, you know, because the cannabis revenue has been budgeted enormously conservatively, and that we should just put on a marker. And it's not risky proposition because it's not an ongoing expense per se. It's a capital expense that we should say for this fiscal year, half of the more than budgeted amount for cannabis revenue should go into our deferred maintenance program.
You know, I don't know whether, you know, we can act on something like that at this time, but, you know, that's a nice sentiment and everything, but I really think that you've got to arrest the growth of that column, and I think you have to try even a little harder than that. You know, it's nice.
I
That's sort
hear
of what
you.
we did.
I hear you, but
That's
it's-
sort of exactly the 18% philosophy.
It's the budget, and we could take action, and we could allocate half of the additional cannabis revenue beyond what is budgeted here. Last year, it came in, what, 2 million more than we budgeted, or $1.5 million?
Supervisor Williams to the chair. We budgeted $5,450,000 in the current fiscal year. We are on track. Again, we haven't received in tax revenues for the fourth quarter. Won't receive those till July. But our current projection would take us over the budgeted number by $260,000. So that's our kind of where we see right now.
Then where did we get the money for the radio replacement? That's not.
That came out of, you recall in the current fiscal year, we allocated some of the tax revenue for one-time purposes, so they aren't reoccurring. So we simply repurposed a portion of those monies that had gone on in the current year as one-time into this new one-time need. So in total budget, anticipated revenues for cannabis, 5.6 next year, 5.615 or something.
And it just depends on, it varies on how many we permit and how many appeals we uphold and how many we deny. I mean, it has a lot to do with that. But I just think that doing something is better than doing nothing.
Okay, well, I
that's where
appreciate
you're gonna get a
that.
disagreement.
I appreciate that. No, that's a good sentiment, but I think we have to expand our minds with respect to the definition of something, because there's a lot more things than cannabis that we can do. Get it? That was me winking at you.
I get what you're hinting at.
Yeah, okay. So, there's other things we can do, and we need to do them. And I also think you have to cut spending. And, I'll start my final speech now by saying I would love to vote for this budget, This budget's a good, solid budget. But it leaves a hole right there that you could drive a truck through. And, one of the things that I do here is make sure we never forget that hole. Because, nobody wants to think about that hole. And I get it. I mean, it's unpleasant. But it's reality, and it's there. And, I think we have to act in a manner, even though it will cause pain. I think we have to make a commitment. I would like to see this board, and I don't harbor any delusions that this can happen, but I think that if this board were to tell the CEO, at least even next year, that they want to see this number arrested, which requires a much larger contribution to maintenance than we've been prepared to make in the past. I would like to vote for that.
I have a question about, while we're on this chart. So the fire transfer tax will be eliminated at the end of this year, and I believe this year we put 11.6 million. Nope, is that not right? I'm sorry, go ahead. So my question is, on the 18%, how much of that additional will be added on to the 18%?
So, Mr. Chair,
I know you don't know, but ballpark it. If we
Right.
did it, if it had been done this year, it would have been a couple extra $1 million.
Correct. So
Okay.
I can't.
I know.
I don't remember off the top of my head exactly how much the 25% shift to.
I'll tell you, it was 11.6 million.
$11.6 million.
Oh,
So
Mona says no. Okay, what was it?
the what? That's the whole amount. Yeah, I'd need to see what the incremental amount was going into the current year. If that's, and then it's 25% of that. I mean, it's 18% of that. So,
Right.
So
So it's going to be more significant. I mean,
So
over $1 million more next year. I'm anticipating. Correct? Is that not close?
Supervisor, so the $11 million is the full amount of the shift. That's the total amount that they're getting we did not have the tax shift. That amount continues on, so it's not
Okay,
like
yeah.
11 million goes
So
to them.
but
It's just
still the
that amount continues
18%
on.
of the 25%. Okay, which would be still significant. Then we add in, what's SB1, Mr. McAlpin? SB1, it said in your report that was going to significantly move up our share. I'm sorry to pounce this on you, but gas tax is supposed to kind of trend up. And this first year was our shortest.
Sure, Mr. Chair and board members, our SB1's going up, I think, about $200,000 from last year to 6.6 from 6.4 last year. So it's gradually working its way up.
Okay, very good. So, you know, I look at the 18%, I look at the deferred maintenance, and yeah, I totally get, you know, this is the argument we had from the very beginning is the problem too big? This thing did not start on our watch. It didn't start 4 years ago or 8 years ago or 10 years ago. Deferred maintenance started 30 years ago. And, you know, we can either look at this and say, hey, there's no sense even trying to tackle the problem because it's too big, or you can start trying to do something. And, you know, I think that chart's, if you want to drop it down a little bit so you can see the thing, I wasn't scared to death by this chart, like I guess I should have been. I'm looking at that as that bottom bar is rising considerably. Yes, the deferred maintenance is taken off, but I think there's other things that we can do that will reduce deferred maintenance if we get rid of some of these properties that we've been sitting on forever that are out on Foster Road that are just death traps. Well, I shouldn't probably said that. That's not a good thing. But they're...
Thanks, Steve. You just reduced the market price by a considerable
Well, there's
amount.
nobody buying those properties, I'm going to tell you. But I think
I'll give you $1.
for any employee working in that, I didn't mean death trap. I wouldn't, yeah. I would just as soon we get people out of those as soon as we possibly can. But there's areas that we can get rid of properties that will reduce our deferred maintenance, because I think we got to get, I think that's something, you know, I've been at least working with Mr. Pontes on for quite a while, of looking at how do we turn this county into where we're working more, looking at new properties, either selling off or, you know, getting out of some of these properties that are just loaded with deferred maintenance. You know, I would be, I think this is a topic that's big enough and important enough that I'm looking out in the future of in our long-range plan of, you know, we've got time on agendas in the future. I think this is something we need to bring back. We're all interested in how do we get to that number and how do we bite into that number, take a bigger bite out of it. But, you know, you go back and look at that. We were doing $2.6 million a year. And if I would have told you in 2014, 2015, we're going to do $22.6 million, you would have said there is no way we're ever going to do that because you guys aren't committed to it. It isn't enough. I get that. But for me, I look at that and say that's considerable progress in a very short amount of time, and that is just going to continue to grow. So it's not going to grow at the same rate the deferred maintenance backlog is growing, and so, yeah, you could say it's never going to get resolved. But if we did that in this county, the way we deal with things, we're never going to end homelessness either, so why spend any money on that? We're not going to fix, you know, the mental health problem that we have. I think we're addressing this, and I would be open to more conversation on it. It sounds like you have more interest than maybe we've had in years past on this, and I'd be supportive of bringing back an agenda item that talks about how can we, what are our different options of dealing with this backlog? It can't just all be, let's, you know, continue to sock more money away. Maybe there's other avenues that we can deal with it. Supervisor Adam?
Yeah, first of all, you know, I don't like that argument that it started a long time ago, because, you know, we're here now. We're in charge. And regardless of whatever anybody did 30 years ago, you know, they made some mistakes, clearly. But they sent us in to figure it out, and we're here, and we should do the most responsible thing that we know how to do. And so I don't think we're actually doing that. We're close, we're fairly close, but we're not quite there yet. And I think that if you recall, when we first started this conversation, I said, let's put 25 million away for 10 years, and that would have brought us down. In theory, we would have paid off that amount, which probably wouldn't have worked, because I think the thing I didn't understand at the time is how fast it was going away from us. So we would have made a tremendous dent in it. But and that's the kind of thing you got to do. You got to throw a lot of money at this thing in a shorter period of time than you would like to do in order to make those to bend the top line downward. You know what you really have to do. You can't just catch. You'll never catch the top line with the bottom line. That will not happen. So you have to put enough money into the thing to bend the top one so it starts trending down. And if you don't do that, you're never going to catch it. And at some point, and I don't think it's that far away, somebody will finally say what you just said, which was it's too big, we can't tackle it. And you know, I do tell people all the time that I believe that you're driving on the best roads, no matter how old you are, just because of our refusal to really engage this. No matter how old you are, you're probably driving on the best roads that you're ever going to drive on in your life right now, which is sad. You know, and how can you tell kids that? It really drives me nuts, but I do it anyway, just so they're aware.
Oh my God.
All right, Supervisor
I'm
Hart.
trying to envision Supervisor Adam telling this to my 3.5-year-old.
Supervisor Hart.
Well, I'll have lunch with her one of these days and fix her up.
Well, I really take what you're saying seriously because I agree with it, and I think that I do. And as a matter of fact, you know, my previous work at SBCAG, you know, we were trying desperately to get additional resources for road investments and transportation investments, and the voters of Santa Barbara County wisely invested in that and raised the sales tax measure to provide that funding. And the path to the place you're trying to get to is painfully obvious. You know, we need to do what the voters are asking us to do, is to provide new revenues to address this backlog and deferred maintenance. And the obvious place is for the federal government to do what the state government did and have the gas tax equal inflation over the past 25 years. Let's not even raise the federal gas tax. Let's just have the federal gas tax go back to where it was in 1992 and have that money be back in the system. That's why we have this massive backlog of deferred maintenance on roads, is that the state and the federal gas tax, which has historically been used to pay for all of this, was never adjusted for inflation for 25 years, and the purchasing power eroded. Yeah. So there's a $6 million a year annual hole from just simply the federal gas tax not being indexed for inflation. And the last time I checked, when people are driving around town, the world has not come to an end when the state raised the gas tax up to account for inflation. So we should be doubling down at the federal level to get the federal government to do the simple thing that the state government has done. That would generate $6 million a year to the county for road maintenance that would go for roads, as exactly like you're talking about, because we need to be talking in terms of these kind of scale solutions to address the gap you're talking about. If we're talking about $1 million here or $500,000 here on an annual budget way in the conversation that's, you know, in play today, it's pointless. We need to be talking about $6 million, $7 million. Where's the other $7 million that we could get? $7.5 million by raising the county sales tax measure by 1% to match what the city of Santa Barbara does.
Well,
to
as
be less
Janet
than
told me one time.
I was really patient while you made your remarks, and I have something to say about this, and I agree with you, and I'm pointing to a path to where you could be successful if you would look outside the box that you approach this from. And so if we were to raise the county, or ask the voters if they want to raise the county's sales tax by 1%, we would generate $7.5 million to go with the $6 million that would come from the federal government adjusting the gas tax for inflation. So those two options alone are more than $15 million, let alone what we might be able to carve out of future cannabis revenues or fire diversion or additional money that comes from the 18% from the fire fund. Now we're talking closer to $20 million. And that's how you solve this problem. There is no way we're going to cut $20 million out of the county's budget and have that be sustainable or realistic or a strategy that anybody would support versus, asking folks if they want to do these things. Asking the voters, do you want to consider the idea of raising the sales tax 1% to generate, $7.5 million that we can put toward deferred maintenance? I think that just seems to me like such a simple question to ask people if they want to do that to solve the problem you're challenging us about.
Okay, well, as Janet told me one time, if you want to do that, put an initiative on the ballot and see if people will accept it. And, that's a great idea. I think that we're taxed enough already, and I think that we should utilize the money that we get to do the things that people expect us to do, which are primarily maintenance and public safety. So, it's just it's a philosophical disagreement on this dais, and it just is what it is. And, I come up here and say the same thing and get rejected every year, so it's nothing new. So, and then if you look at the $6 million from the feds, first of all, that is out of our control. We can't, we largely, aside from some lobbying efforts, which we're already engaged in, we're passively waiting for the $6 million to come from the Bank of Unicorns and Rainbows. But that's probably problematic at best, and I don't know whether it's coming or not. But as it's out of our control, I prefer taking the things within our control and allocating them wisely, or as wisely as we can. And like I said, I don't think we've quite done that. And then add that up, and I don't know where you came up with another $7 million. I think you were talking about, but the 22 that we're already spending, including the SB1 stuff, and the 6 that you're talking about are 28, and we deferred 38.
He was talking about sales tax as well.
Oh, a sales tax.
Another
Gotcha.
$7 million there.
Okay. Well,
plus cannabis.
Yeah, no, I get it. All adds up. Absolutely. You are absolutely correct. But there's other things that I'd like to take it out of, not doing CCE and not doing things. And I don't know what the fiscal impact was, and I wasn't here that week when we decided to replace our cars with electric, and there's probably a fiscal impact to that maybe somebody can figure it out 2 different ways. But anyway, you got $38 million deferred last year. You're looking like at 9% or so going up on an annual basis, and that depends heavily as to what happens with rain on the roads. And the other thing you got to remember is when they redo the roads every year, they only look at a third. So you're only capturing a third of the damage that occurred from last year's roads in your deferred number. So it takes you 3 years to find out what happened last year in a total way. And in the meantime, there was other weather that continued on. And so it's deteriorating at some rate that's even more rapid than it looks like, because the more it deteriorates, the more expensive, as you know, it is to fix. So anyway, there you have it.
Okay. We have Supervisor Hartman and then Supervisor Williams.
Just on the subject, before we leave it, Supervisor Adam, I think you've been used to being rejected on this subject so much that you think this is rejection. He's not rejecting you. He's saying he'll go out with you, but it just has to be Dutch, right? You got to meet halfway here.
Okay, I already did one. Okay, I paid at the office. Okay, I gave it the office.
We have an actual person on this board now with career experience in transportation infrastructure, and he's laying out a path by which we could close this gap. And I think, it doesn't take you supporting a sales tax, it just takes you putting one on the ballot, because if you rely on advocates to put it on the ballot, that it will skew towards the advocates' budget priorities instead of our county staff budget priorities. And arguably, I would say they probably have better expertise on it. So, I mean, if we put something on the ballot, then it's the priorities of the institution and not the priorities of advocates. And so I just ask you to keep on thinking about that.
Okay, Supervisor Hartman.
Thank you. I just wanted to echo my support for maintenance funding over time, because it's not just the roads, but it's active transportation, and we really need to fund this. I support what Supervisor Hart has suggested. I think nobody disagrees. We need to do this. The question is over what period of time and what mix of funding. And I don't know whether we might agree for a sales tax or whether we might go towards what Supervisor Lavanino suggested and looking at this in more detail. But it is a high priority for all of us. But on more mundane things, I just wanted to come back to bringing forward new ideas for the budget at this point. I did that last year, and it kind of went sideways of what our staff and general services does, bringing forward priorities. So I'm not inclined to do that. However, we do have a new animal services director, and I know there are needs, and I would be willing to put $25,000 just for her to look at our facilities and animal services and come back next year with some ideas about what needs to be done, and at least she has a little bit to work with. For the libraries, I just want to say we've worked really hard, the ad hoc committee, and need to call out the zone administrators and the representatives who've served on that. There was a lot of misunderstanding, and we've come together, I think, and had a meeting of the minds on categorizing our libraries and understanding what our fundamental library needs at different levels. And we're going to keep working for long-term funding strategy. At this point, though, as said, the county has a long history of making up the difference. We're continuing to contribute, but we need the cities, where there are cities, to contribute as well, and they have been very, very generous. I want to call out SBCAG, where we also had a meeting where everybody could get this same information at the same time, and I think that did help the cities understand the rationale, and then we matched the Friends in unincorporated areas 2-to-1. So I think there is a fair degree of consensus on library funding. We do have 2 libraries, Guadalupe and Orchid, that have to pay rent, and over time we need to figure out how we can get them out of that rent money and more into programming. So that's something that the ad hoc will be looking at. So the 135 for libraries, 426,100 for community choice energy, and if we are able to go with another program, I would like to see that transfer over into our strategic energy plan implementation, and particularly looking at energy assurance plans. If the utilities have to shut down, exactly how are we going to fill in for emergency energy services? Everyone knows, I think I'm a big advocate for the Recreation Master Plan. I think that will generate more money over time and a much better recreation system for our county-wide. For the alternative commute options for employees, I would put that at 50, and for the cannabis tax compliance, I'd put that at 100, and I think that gets me to what we have available to allocate.
Okay. Well, I'll go through these really quick. First off, I'd like to hear from Jeanette, if you could, just on the DA's office, I know we have kind of a master plan. I don't want to, get in the way of what's already planned out. And
Mr. Chair and members of the board, we have been working on some security projects for the DA, and I know that there are some projects in flux or in flight. I mean, they're coming. And I'm not exactly sure what the additional changes they want made.
Okay.
But this...
Do you want to guys come up and... I'm only doing this because Joyce isn't here, and I just want Mag to have to say something at the meeting, so.
Thank you. Good morning, Chair Lavanino.
Good morning.
Members of the board. As to Supervisor Hart's item, the $35,000, thank you so much for supporting that. We do have a few things that really need to be addressed, hopefully sooner rather than later, that are not part of the general services plan for the security build-out. As Supervisor Hart mentioned, we certainly have an issue with cramping, and we can't figure that out without having some kind of architectural review for our space. We don't have enough physical space. I believe I may have mentioned that last year sometime in front of the board. In addition, we still have the issue of the environmental problem, the ceiling tiles falling down. And we do have a break room that with a modicum amount of money we can restore, improve, and that will serve literally half of the office that we have in Santa Maria. So we'd really like to see that done.
All right. Thank you. Ms. Pell stood back up. This is point, counterpoint. No.
It's unclear to me if you're talking about the ceiling tiles or the roof.
The tiles.
The tiles, okay. So, yeah, there's probably a few things, and I do know they're running out of room, and we will be working with the sheriff to see if we can reutilize that space so everyone has a little bit more space to use.
All right. Supervisor Adam?
If I could ask Mr. Nicola, do you have $35,000 in services and supplies left in fund balance?
The services and supplies. Michael.
Supervisor Adam, through the chair, I think your question is as far as in the current fiscal year, if we have an additional
fund balance.
So within fund balance, we have a strategic plan that we're already committing $172,000 to dedicate to our master renovation plan for the North County. That we're estimated that our total cost for that facility needs right now are about in the $800,000 range is what was in our CIP book. Of that $800,000, we've committed $172,000 of our Prop 172 fund balance to that project. And so this additional monies would assist in that, effort to get us to where we need to be. Obviously, getting us to $200,000 is only 1/4 of the total of the $800 that we need for the complete project.
Yeah, but you're asking for 35 for a specific purpose, and I don't understand why we can't just roll that fund balance into that.
So this 35 would be on top of the fund balance that we're committing as well. So the total CIP, the total project itself is $800,000 of needs for that facility.
Well, I understand that, and that's a capital thing, and you're asking to do some maintenance, which I'm not clear on. Isn't that maintenance for $35,000?
Yeah, it certainly could be considered maintenance. I mean, as far as the ceiling tiles and.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I'm kind of unclear on why. I realize it seems to have gone from one column to another in your mind, but I don't know why you wouldn't just spend it on what it was intended for, which is services and supplies. You could arguably do some maintenance out of that, right?
So Supervisor Adam, we submitted a CIP proposal for the $817,000. That's outside of our normal budget. Of that $817,000, we committed $172,000 of our fund balance that was available for that purpose. And so that leaves us short,
Okay, but I just want to talk about the 35.
Sure. So
you've just added that 35 that's retained in fund balance over to the other 172.
So the 35 is on top of the 172.
Okay. All right. Thanks.
All right. I appreciate it. Thank you. I'm going to go ahead and I'm okay with adding that. So put me down for the 35,000. Libraries, 135. CCE, I'll do $10,000 because I think that's what's going to cost us to join Monterey. Recreation Master Plan, just so people understand why I'm supporting the $350,000 for that. We had a Proposition 68 allocated $4 billion statewide for parks and recreation. $725 million of that is for neighborhood parks in park-poor neighborhoods, which I believe my district would fall right into, and I want to make sure that we are primed and ready to compete for those grants. So $350,000 there. The $175 for the cannabis tax compliance, and then I'd put the other $700,000 towards cannabis enforcement, or whatever's left out of my. Is that what I? Okay, very good. I do have some remarks as well, so we'll just get to those real quick. When I saw CEO Miyasato's budget book, it's entitled Honoring Our Commitments, Transforming Our Future, and I thought that's exactly what we're doing with this year's budget. Initially, I wasn't really happy with the budget being scheduled for one day. I think I was the only one that kind of raised a stink. I know we spent 3 days in April listening to each department head detail out their wants and needs, but I actually wanted more. Then I came to realize that more is not always better. The fact is, because of decisions we made in previous years, we've removed much of the drama out of the budget hearing process. Gone for the most part are last-minute, ninth-inning requests, many of which were well-deserving, but generally, from my perspective, lacked oversight and accountability. Instead, we have a document that's been extremely well vetted, one that delivers on the commitments that we made while simultaneously putting us in a position to deal with the next downturn. It's not sexy to put money away for a rainy day, but I remember how deep we had to cut when that rainy day came, and so it's imperative that we continue to fully fund our strategic reserve. This budget keeps that promise by increasing our reserves to the industry recommended 8% of operating revenue, a full $36.4 million. This budget and this board also continued to follow the Northern Branch Jail operational funding plan that we began in 2011. It was a leap of faith back then, a long-range plan that structurally changed our budget and would only work if future boards continued on with the plan. I want to thank my colleagues because we'll soon be attending a ribbon cutting in the streets of North County. Will be decidedly safer as fewer officers will have to leave their beat and make the 3 or 4 hour round trip to our South County jail. The price tag for that in this year's budget was $12.9 million. Another structural budget change occurred in 2012. Once again, the board had to make a tough decision with very limited resources. This board voted unanimously to enhance the fire district's property tax share by taking 25% of the incremental property tax growth until we reached 17%. We reached that goal 1 year ahead of schedule. And in 2015, another budgetary formula was implemented. Due to an ever-growing backlog in deferred maintenance, the board adopted a commitment of taking 8% of unallocated discretionary revenue and directing it at maintenance. When we passed that 4 short years ago, the budget only allocated $2.6 million. And we saw in the chart, we're spending $22.6 million this fiscal year. And that number will grow even higher now that the fire transfer tax has been completed. I totally agree with what Supervisor Hart talked about on the federal level, and I know, hoping for federal intervention is not a plan. But we were also told the same thing when we mentioned that we needed the state's involvement. We were told that we would never get the state was broke, they're never going to do anything, and now we have SB1. Where in the past we've had drama, we now have formulas. I liked the drama, but I love the formulas. These formulas now account for almost $50 million this fiscal year. I feel we're well positioned to deal with the next economic downturn. I'm confident my colleagues will continue to practice fiscal responsibility. I'd like to thank our CEO, Mona Miyasato, for her guidance and vision as we continue to do the people's work as efficiently and as effectively as possible. I appreciate the work of Jeff Frapwell and his budget team for providing technical expertise and information in a very open and transparent manner for the public. Speaking of the public, I'd like to thank the taxpayers of Santa Barbara County. We tend to forget them. No one likes to pay taxes, but they are necessary. Your sacrifice enables a foster child to find a new home. It puts a roof over the head of a homeless veteran and provides a meal to a hungry senior. You provide the tools for our law enforcement officers and specialists who assist our mentally ill. You pay the salaries of every one of our 4,247 employees. Thank you. I'd also like to thank our employees. Retirement cost sharing between the county and our employees was negotiated and implemented last fiscal year, which resulted in an actual net retirement contribution decrease from last year's budget. For those employees who have been here long enough to remember the Great Recession, thank you for your perseverance. You were asked to do a lot more with less. I hope you are as excited about Renew 22 as I am, the initiative that allows you to tell us how we can improve our processes. Your commitment to public service, whether as a social worker, probation officer, a mid-level manager, or an AOP, is critical to our overall success. Thank you for your effort this year, and here's to transforming our future. So with that, I don't know if we all kind of want to take a break, go back and look at this chart before we make any decisions. If you're okay with that, I would recommend like a 10-minute break, 15-minute break. Let staff kind of compile all this, and we'll be back at 11:30 to do our final deliberations. Supervisor Williams.
Well, I was going to ask a question about the 426-100, if that's enough to continue the CCE work as planned. But so that input that we had gotten when we asked your staff was that they need 430, but 426-100 is close.
Supervisor Williams, through the chair, I think it would be a longer process. It's going to be a long process. If the board decides to form a CCE, we wouldn't be able to form in 2020. It would be 2021. So 430 in this year, we'd probably have to come back and ask for more next year for the work. And it's really getting it started and all the staffing and hiring and the consultants and all that work.
Thank you.
Okay, so what happens if we allocate $430,000 and we come back and we learn that the determination is that joining Monterey makes more financial sense? What happens to those dollars?
Supervisors, through the chair, those dollars would be in their budget, and it would be for the board to direct us on how to spend that. Supervisor Hartman had a suggestion. So it would really be up to your board and how you'd want to spend that. It'd be in their budget, but it'd be at your discretion. And just FYI, I think in the previous years we've funded CCE to build money up in case we wanted to do our own CCE, and there's $650 already in that pot.
Okay, so that's kind of what I'm struggling with. If there's $650 in the pot, and we just got a report back from a consultant, and you're going to bring that back to us.
Yes. Well,
what's the other $450,000 for?
Initially, the startup costs were about $1.4 million, and so the $650 plus the $750 got us to about $1.4 million was the startup. And then
I'm just still
have to allocate the similar amount in next year's budget to get there.
So what I'm struggling with a lot is the discrepancy between what the startup cost is to do it ourselves and the startup cost to go and join somebody is just astronomical, and can't think of any reason. I mean,
Well,
I guess I need to know more about.
Maybe we should just try to encourage more cities to be ready to go with Monterey. I mean, it would make it I think that the issue is, whether there's enough of a critical mass in Santa Barbara County for Monterey to do both PG&E and SCE territory in Santa Barbara County, and this is the jobs part, and whether they would consider doing an energy facility here. I mean, that is...
We don't build anything here. Why would we make this?
That's a thing of the past, Steve. We're going to build some stuff here.
Okay. All right. Okay, so we'll take our deliberations. Thank you. And then we'll be back at 11:35. Thanks. Oh, no, I'm going to, I have to because.
No, I gotta go.
The last. I don't know. Yeah. All right. So we're coming back. What is this called? Attachment E? It's our favorite. So I guess there's a couple of questions. For me, the most imperative thing is to stay within the boundaries of our one-time funds. And so however we come to that decision, I think that's my number one priority. So I kind of want to ask a few questions about some of these items. For example, on the cannabis tax compliance audit, how firm are we on that $175,000 that's what it's going to cost us?
Mr. Chair, that is our best estimate today.
So we're not 100% sure there, but that's what we think it's going to cost. Recreation master plan, where did the 350 come from? Is that a hard and fast number, or is there any wiggle room in that, Mr. Chapjian?
Chair Lavin, members of the board, I'm sorry to say there really isn't, because there's a process.
Okay.
And you've got to go through that process to be able to get to the environmental.
Okay. So then, I guess what this all comes down to is CCE. And so from what I understand, somebody has $650,000 currently that was allocated this year. And I'm trying to figure out, how are you going to spend $650 and another $400 something thousand in this next fiscal year? What's that going to be spent on?
I can go through that. The $650, which is the fund balance that we have, is to hire outside counsel to develop the JPA agreements, negotiate JPA with cities, county staff, et cetera, hire technical consultants to update the pro forma and develop implementation plans to submit to the CPUC, and that's a process too, the CPUC process. And then the other additional operating costs would go to hire JPA staff, that would be the executive director, plus 15 to 20 staff, obtain office space, hire key vendors. So those are all operational things, getting kind of a company started, really.
Okay, so this is what I'm struggling with. So would we have to spend that money if we joined another CCE?
No, you wouldn't.
Okay. So, we have not made the determination yet whether or not we're going to join Monterey, because we haven't really we don't have the consultant report yet. So we're being asked to fund another 400 something thousand, which is $1 million that we really not even sure that we're going to do yet. And I'm just, for me, that's a struggle. So Supervisor Williams.
I completely understand that. The other viewpoint is, and I'm 50-50 between doing it ourselves and going with Monterey. My issues are, I don't want to foreclose the possibility of doing local generation to create jobs here. I don't want to foreclose the possibility of going along with other local Santa Barbara County cities. And
explain to me why that's important, because I don't understand why that's important.
So it's if they go and form their own CCE, the number of customers creates economies of scale. It's a lot more complicated than that, but that's the simple version of it. And look, we have cities that we are partners with on this. So to me, it matters if Monterey won't take the cities of the South Coast in SCE territory. We have not heard a definitive, number one, if they would take county SCE or if they'd take the city of Santa Barbara and the city of Goleta. So my issue is only that we should not kill the possibility of going with an independent CCE before we've reached that juncture. And the worst situation to me, that means is that we would have a significant amount of money to allocate towards priorities that we have. So since you like the reserve so much, just think of it as another little reserve.
So, so what I'm hearing though, okay, so if we heard, let's say we didn't allocate anything for it, and then we come up in July, which happens to be next month, and you come back and give us these options. Let's say you still wanted to go to, you wanted to start your own CCE. Why wouldn't you be able to do it then?
Because you'd be slowed down another year to do it, and by that time,
How is he slowing it from a year if we're going to hear this thing in a month?
Because there's a deadline each time in January to submit a plan, is my understanding.
Yes, to the CPUC. You have to submit a plan to the CPUC.
So you're telling me it's faster to start your own CCE than it is to join an existing
That's
one?
not what I'm saying.
Okay,
What I'm
what are you
saying is that if Monterey turns out to not be possible, or to not fit our preferences, and right now, honestly, I'm 50-50, and the very fact that you're open to Monterey makes me even more interested in Monterey. But I think if the only possibility of doing it for SCE territory ends up being doing it ourselves, we would be essentially killing the possibility of doing it on the timeline that we have if we don't allocate enough money today. And that's why I just think it's important. All three budgets that I've been here for, we have used reserves, so I'm not quite sure why it's become a sacred cow, but I hear you. It's a sacred cow to you guys, and it would be nice to be able to say that for the first time in a long time we didn't use any reserves on the budget. So, I mean, I could support a budget, and I could see trimming some things down here to still meet it without using any of the reserves. But I just think that we need to get pretty close to that 430 number to be able to allow them to continue in the timeline that we have, if that's our only option. And I'd love to have Monterey rush to the rescue for us, but I think we can't prejudge that.
Okay. CEO Miyasato.
Supervisor, through the chair, so this might help, and Mr. Chapchin's at the podium. I know he's been out this week, but we've met with his staff, and I know we're premature talking about the CCE because they are coming back to you in early July, looking thoroughly at the different options. Mr. Chapchin mentioned that they do need money if the board does want to go forward with their own CCE, which will make that decision next month, of getting a consultant on to do the implementation plan, do some technical studies. I don't know realistically if hiring the JPA staff is going to happen next fiscal year. It takes us a while to hire anything, unfortunately. So I don't know how much of that makes up the $430,000. But I think that if you did want to go forward, we would need to do the technical studies. But I don't know if we would have if you would need to hire all the JPA staff next year. That's one thing. The second thing is, again, just for full information, because I don't want you to be surprised when we come back next month, is that the Monterey option has lots of benefits, but lots of issues, as Supervisor Williams also talked about. But when we last met with the staff, there was going to be a contribution by the county of about $6.5 million. And it could be a loan that we guarantee, or it could be cash. But I just want to make sure that everyone's aware there would be a greater financial obligation than we're talking about. And we would figure that out if the board wanted to do that. So again, the other option, because I know you're struggling.
Contrast that, if we did it independent, it would be about $8.5 million. So
No, I think she's saying that is the independent.
Yeah,
if we join Monterey.
I think it's about $9 million, but our share with it, because we'd be the largest. And I believe the study that we're coming back with was the unincorporated county, so it didn't rely on the cities participating, although we would like our cities to be able to participate. And just the last thing is that if we don't know, because it's really a big unknown, we don't know if the board wants to go forward with our own next month when you make that decision. But also then throughout the year, you have enough money to allocate $250,000 to stay within the reserves, as Supervisor Hart suggested. So the question is, would you need an additional $200,000? And throughout the year, we could monitor the department's budget. If it's within its budget, salary savings, excess service and supplies, excess revenues within their budget as we proceed along the year to cover some of that cost. But again, I don't know if we're going to need the full cost to hire all those JPA staff. And the question, who is the JPA at that point? Is it the board or is it us with other agencies? So it'd be a whole new an organization.
My issue is that this has been a very divided board on this subject matter. And so relying on a 4-vote majority to allocate additional funds gives one member of a board that might be in the minority a chance to kill the board's biggest priority. And every year we've delayed this, the legislature takes more actions, or the PUC takes more actions to make it harder for us. So one more year of delay is a significant issue. And so, that is why it is a priority for me to make sure that the department, in the event that we move forward with an independent, has the money to move forward as an independent and not wait another year for it to get even worse financially for us to do so.
Okay. So I guess that's a policy call. All right, so we all have our, Mr. Frappel, do you want to summarize Table E?
Sure. Mr. Chairman, members of the board, so what you have in front of you here is, I want to draw your attention to the first column of numbers. And that column there has been populated to where the numbers across your board have not been consistent. We've taken the lowest common denominator and kind of populated that. And you can see by doing that where at least those issues had at least 3 votes in support of those measures. We've done the lowest common denominator. That's brought us to using $1,020,000. And you can see up above in there in yellow, that means the remaining available one-time funding of $66,100. So this is kind of that next starting point of deliberations for your board, and be happy to take your board's direction.
All right, well, I don't want to speak for the board because I'm at $10,000, but it would seem like the way that everybody's talking about that, I'm guessing you guys want to take that $66,000 and put it towards CCE, correct? And at least get it up to 3, whatever that is. I went to school a long time ago. So do you want it, is everybody nodding on that? I mean,
Yeah.
You have 3 votes for that, correct? Okay.
And I just have one other suggestion that I ran by
316.
Mr.
Okay.
Frappwell is we don't really know how much the cannabis tax compliant audit is going to be. And so allocating $100,000 towards it should be enough. We also have additional revenue, and I prize Jeff's talents, and he liked that idea a lot more than using a tiny bit of reserves. So I would just suggest that we put cannabis tax compliance audit to $100K and put that towards CCE as well, and then call it a day.
Okay, and any overage that we get in cannabis tax revenue, the first chunk of that would go towards, no, I'm talking about that would backfill that cannabis tax compliance audit.
Yeah,
Is that
absolutely.
okay? Does that make sense?
Right.
All right.
And I just add to that, I think that it's a responsible call in the context of what we've been talking about for capital to at least designate half of remaining cannabis tax revenue towards deferred maintenance for this fiscal year. But I'm happy to do that in a separate motion if that's a point of disagreement. I thought that was going to be a kumbaya, but.
Well, that gets to Supervisor Adams' point of, for me, I think we need another 100,000 or 200,000, 300,000 is not going to change. I'd rather wait for us to have the meeting about what the long-term looks like before we make another commitment like that. So
I was just
I know.
trying to make it a little bit nicer for you.
Yeah, no, it's fine. Okay, so this is kind of where we landed. So recap is
think, Paul, if there are 3 nods on the head for the tax compliance to go to 100,000 and then put the 75, is that what you said, Supervisor?
Yeah.
So take that to 100,000 on your green, yeah.
No, just on the green side is all we really care about anymore.
And then add that 75 to the
Yeah.
CCE. Correct.
And Mr. Chair, I do want to bring one more thing to your attention. What we've done, and we've added there on the very bottom with the zero cost, we've added the, what I think I heard your board talk about was the additional planner positions for planning to deal with the number of applications. So I don't know if you, there's no cost because it's offset by obviously permit revenue, but that was something we heard and want to get your direction.
Why don't you put it up there and then just put a $0 next to it?
It showed a $0.
I thought those were 2 planners that were already discussed in the budget workshop. So you're talking about another 2. Okay. Well, hey, however many they got to put in there that's cost neutral for me is fine. Supervisor Adam.
See, I don't understand why you guys don't have to go put a tax on the ballot for CCE. How come we get to strip out general fund money for CCE and, other stuff without getting into a long?
Because they have 3 votes. For the same reason that for 3 votes, you could allocate infrastructure funds.
Well, and the answer is that the CCE startup costs are a loan to the CCE. They're going to come back. So this is not an expenditure. This is an advance that comes back on the revenues from the operation of the program.
Which I haven't been convinced of yet, but that's what I'll gladly pay you Tuesday for a hamburger today. But, yeah.
And in the meantime, we defer more maintenance, and it gets more expensive. And
okay, so
I am redundant.
Yeah. So with that green list, just want to make sure, Mr. Frapwell, we're not spending any reserves. This was part of the discretionary revenue that you gave this board direction to fund their priorities, correct?
Correct.
Okay. So out of the very limited $1 million, $1,086,100, we found a way to spend it. And that does have, looks like consensus. I'll just say, look, from my perspective, this is what budgets are. I mean, I'm not going to, fall on the sword over one line item that's $391,000 out of a $1.1 billion budget. There's obviously things in here everybody's got heartburn with, but I also realize where my place is, and I can argue about these things, but I look at this budget as an overall package. It's huge. For me, it has a lot of the priorities that I'm concerned about taking care of. I feel like we're on the right path, and I'll deal with these individual expenditures as they come along, and hopefully be able to sway some votes that way. Supervisor Hart.
Yeah, I agree 100%. I think, staying at the 40,000 foot level, no service reductions, planning ahead for a potential recession by building in, declining revenues over time is really smart. We're making sustainable progress toward meeting the long-term financial commitments. There's a difference of opinion about how fast we should be doing that or not, but we are making progress. So that's, got us pause and say, and ahead of the target that was identified in 2014, and full funding of a strategic reserve. I think that's a really great place to be starting or finishing a budget process.
Supervisor Hartman.
I think that was eloquently stated, both of you. And I just wanted to add that cannabis enforcement is clearly a very high priority, and we've doubled our enforcement budget this year. We have 4 new planners, so I feel confident that we're going to continue to make good progress with the extraordinary work that's being done on that front. So just wanted to highlight that. And I don't know if we want to discuss if in fact we do have additional cannabis revenues and where we'd like to see them, but for me, PCI would be a high priority.
Okay. All right, Supervisor Adam.
Well, if we were 300,000 or 400,000 off, I would.
Yeah,
I would go for it. I totally subscribe to that argument that it's a huge budget, huge document, huge effort by staff to put this together, and that's why I gave such high marks to the overall effort. But you know, it's just, we don't fund that to the point where that BIF 3 line gets bent down. And that's got to be the criteria. You know, nobody from, none of my constituents and plenty of other people from all over the county have ever told me to slow down the damage as much as I could, or take half a loaf. You know, I think I have been stroked a lot for saying things that don't get adopted but are out there in the world and have become kind of a part of the whole budgeting process and everything else. So, you know, took something that wasn't on anybody's radar and put it there in a permanent manner, and that's been good. And last year I did vote for the budget, and I did so because I felt that it represented a major change in that we committed significantly more general fund to the maintenance effort. And this year we relied on one-time money and contributions from state sources, which may or may not continue to make up the expansion. I feel like if you're not really taking the bull by the horns unless you arrest that growth number and you use general fund to do it. So if I can't support this budget this year, it's because I want to set the bar higher. I want us to be successful. And if I start voting for the budget before we solve this very real and growing problem, even though we are making significantly larger effort than in the past, I fear that we'll be demotivated to continue towards the goal of reducing the accumulated deferred maintenance in the future.
All right, well, as the resident half loafer, I'll just have to say that my residents understand, I think, that I'm not going to get all of my priorities taken care of or all of their priorities. So I think most people are looking for me to do best possible outcome that I see. And in this budget, that's kind of where we're at. So I have ideals. They're just not all going to get addressed. And I'll be supporting this budget. Supervisor Williams?
I was just gonna agree with your constructive positivity. I think this budget makes progress. You know, just from the fact that I didn't get my way from dipping slightly into reserves, it's even more of a bragging point. I mean, that we are more secure enough that we're not dipping into reserves to take care of our priorities. And that really that we've been able to substantially increase our cannabis enforcement team without endangering other priorities says a lot. And I hear both Mr. Lavadino and Mr. Adam on infrastructure. I think the steepening of the curve in terms is a healthy thing of our spending. You know, of course, it's meant that we've kept pace but not won a whole lot of ground yet. Is what the gap remains, and I hear you that the gap remains. But I do think that Mr. Hart has articulated some ideas, and I think there may be others out there, and I wholeheartedly agree with Mr. Lavadino's proposal to put that as a D item at some point to talk a little bit more about.
All right, can you get a motion?
And I don't want to forget that it helps save a whole lot of libraries too. I mean, that this should be a real victory that you know, our investment in the libraries of this county has had to grow the last couple of years, but it will pay off for our residents.
Through the cannabis tax.
That's right.
Yes.
Paid for by the cannabis tax.
That's right.
But a needed service that the county is one of the parties responsible for providing.
Very good. Can I get a motion for A through H? Oh, yep. Mr. Gazzoni first.
Chair and supervisors, part of what you're acting on today at recommended action F is adding in those 2 planning positions so that the motion as written or as recommended actions is clear on that, but I just want to underscore that staff would then be updating that resolution to show the 2 additional positions and increase all the totals in that and bring it back to you for signature, and that's part of your motion.
Okay.
I just
Hold up,
wanted the
CEO
auditor
Miyasato.
auditor to weigh in just to, she had a comment. Oh.
Actually, I think we already updated the resolution for that. Okay.
Oof, we're good. Okay. Be on it. All right, so can we get a motion for A through H?
So moved.
Roll call, please.
Mr. Williams?
Aye.
Mr. Hart?
Aye.
Ms. Hartman?
Aye.
Mr. Adam?
No.
Chair Lavanino?
Aye.
Motion passes 4-1 with Supervisor Adam voting no.
Okay, we still have item 2, which should be very quick, but can I get that read in, please?
Chair Lavanino, members of the board, departmental item number 2 for budget hearings today is from the County Executive Office. It is a hearing to consider recommendations regarding fiscal year 2019 through 2020 recommended budget for the County of Santa Barbara as successor agency to the former County of Santa Barbara Redevelopment Agency.
Is there a presentation or anything? No? Okay, can I get a motion to move items A and B?
Second.
Moved and seconded. Roll call.
Mr. Williams?
Aye.
Mr. Hart?
Aye.
Ms. Hartman?
Aye.
Mr. Adam?
Aye.
Chair Lavanino?
Aye.
Motion passes unanimous.
All right. Thank you very much for coming today, and we will adjourn to Tuesday, June 18th in Santa Maria. Thank you.